Hey, this is Brian from Cohesity, and I'm going to show you how to bring the Cohesity REST API into PowerShell. So, if you go and search for GitHub Cohesity, scroll down a bit, you'll find my stuff right here. And I have a scripts repository. And in there's a PowerShell folder. Now, there's just hundreds of tools and examples out here in this repository, but they all use this function library called Cohesity-API.ps1, and I provide you with download commands that you can run in PowerShell. Hopefully your PowerShell session can reach the internet. If so, you can copy these commands, go to PowerShell, and paste them right in, and it should download that file, cohesity-api.ps1. If not, you can click on the file, and don't copy this, because this is actually rendered HTML, so you might end up with HTML code instead of PowerShell code. You want to click the raw button, and now you can select all, copy, open an editor and paste this in, and call it cohesity-api.ps1. Once you have that file, you can say, you can dot source it, right? You can say dot space dot slash cohesity-api.ps1. That brings the functions inside that file into the current session of PowerShell. So now I can use the functions that are in there. So there's a couple of functions, one of which is for authentication, right? So I can say, let's say I want to connect to this Cohesity cluster called VE4. I can say API auth. My VIP is VE4. My username is admin. And that's really all you need. It assumes the domain is local, but you can say domain local, or if this were, say, an Active Directory account, I could say, my user domain is mydomain.net, things like that. And there's a lot of other options. I can use an API key for authentication. I can connect to Helios if I omit the VIP and say, well, I can just leave it like that and connect to Helios, and then I can get my list of Helios clusters, right? And I can say Helios cluster, like this cluster here, right? And then I can use the API to access that cluster. But let's just connect directly to the VE4. A little slow because I'm going through a firewall, but in any case, I'm connected, and then I can do things like right. So API auth has a lot of features for connecting, authenticating in different ways, through Helios, using API keys, using username and password. It has, you can provide the MFA code if you have MFA turned on, all those kind of things. But let's move on here. So let's say, take a look at the UI. And again, we're going to look at the developer console while we exercise the UI so we can see the API calls that are being made. So in Chrome, you go to More Tools, Developer Tools. And again, we're going to focus on the Network tab and the XHR sub-tab. And then I'm going to exercise the UI, like so, for example, data protection. It makes a couple of API calls. It gets the list of protection groups, which are shown here, and the policies for each protection group. You see the policy under here. It gets that using this API call. So let's look at the first one here. And it's doing a get to this URL. So I'm going to copy this URL. And then I'm going to go back to PowerShell and I'm going to say, let's say protection groups equals API get, and then in quotes. The reason it needs quotes is because the PowerShell will interpret these ampersands, and so we have to quote that. So I'm just going to hit enter. And then we can take a look at what's in those protection groups, which should be the same as what's in here, right? And if we look, Chrome gives you this nice preview tab. So you see that underneath that response is a protection groups element. And then within there, you see all the protection groups. So let's take a look at, so you can see it's the same. So protection groups, dot protection groups, and then you can see all the protection groups. And this is an array. So if we look at the first one, 0, that's the VE4 SQL protection group, and you can see all the properties thereof, like is it paused, false, right? The last run, okay, and so the last run ID. Let's take a look at the local backup info. Start time. Right now, that's this number. This is what's known as epic time in microseconds, right? And Cohesity-API.ps1 has a function called usex to date. So we can convert that Unix epic microseconds to a human readable date, right? And there's also a date to usex function, which if you give it no parameters, it'll just convert the current date and time to usex. And then, of course, we can convert that back. Right? So, pretty powerful. Just a handful of functions. I didn't say it out loud, but I used the API function, right? And you can, there's a couple things you can do, right? Like you saw me use the entire URL. Whoops, forgot to put my quotes. So, but you can also, it infers the HTTPS and the VIP and the V1 and V2 stuff automatically, right? So I can say -V2, right? You saw me do API get protection jobs. That's a V1 version of the same call. Whoops. Protection jobs. uh, that's inferring this whole, the whole URL around it, right? So it provides you with shortcuts, for V1 and V2 to make it easier so you don't have to tote around these really long strings in your code, right? But let's move on. So let's say I want to protect some VMs. So I'm going to protect virtual machines. And you see right away I made some API calls, like it looked up the VM sources that I have on my system, that, for VMware, KVM, Hyper-V, clouds, and so forth, to see what, essentially to build this list of registered sources that are potential holders of VMs, right? So let me do that. Whoops. So let's look under there. So I've got two sources. One of them is in Azure, right? One of them is VMware. So let's take a look at the second one. So that's my vCenter. It's got a protection source ID of 70. And then let's select that source in the UI. And then you see it makes another API call pointing to that specific vCenter. And that gets us, I'm just going to grab this part. So now this is the full hierarchy of data centers, clusters, VMs under that vCenter, right? So if we take a look, and this is a pretty deep hierarchy, but you've got child nodes, right? The first one, node 0.protection source. You see as the data center's container, right? And then it has nodes, and the first one is my home data center, and then it has nodes, and we can take a look. So it's got the base of the folder hierarchy and the base of the hosts hierarchy. So we can look at the hosts, and I've got two hosts under there, and so forth, right? And then under there there'll be VMs and so forth. So it's a deep hierarchy of child nodes, and so when we're looking for VMs, we sort of dig through that hierarchy in a recursive fashion, and looking for the VMs that we want to add to our protection group. In any case, that's probably a little more than you wanted to know, but in any case, we go and let's select some VMs to protect. I'm going to look for a couple of them. So Linux 9A and Linux 9B. Continue, give it a name. And then I'll go select my policy. Again, it goes and looks up the policies on my system. And here's that list. So again, I can get these in PowerShell. I could say policies equals API get. It's a V2 API call, right? Policies. Policies right? So I can, you know, each one has a name, an ID, and the policy elements are in there. Like let's say my local, I can say policy equals policies dot policies where object name equals local. So there's that policy, and we can dig in there and look. The backup policy, regular, incremental schedule is unit days, day schedule 1, right? So every 1 day, right? In any case, we choose that policy. More options. I'm going to pause this so it doesn't actually run. And then I'm going to click protect. So here's that post where we created that protection group, and here's our payload. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you, I'm going to steal this, I'm going to view that payload as, actually you could do it a couple of ways. I can just say copy object, that's going to copy that JSON to my clipboard. And Cohesity-API.ps1 has a function called JSON to code. And then in single quotes, I'm going to paste that JSON that I got from the UI and then close the single quote. And it's going to convert that into a PowerShell declaration, right? You see, instead of, you know, colons, it's equals. Instead of commas, it's semicolons, and you know, a few other things. PowerShell looks slightly different than JSON, but I'm going to now copy this, and I'm going to paste it. So now I have this my object dictionary, and if we convert this to, there's also a toJSON function. So there's that raw JSON again, right? This is the definition for creating that protection group. So what I'm now going to do is, here's that new protection group. I'm going to delete it. And then let's recreate it. Okay, so I have this, again, stored in this my object. So, and so that was API post v2 data protection groups, and I'll feed it my object. So we just recreated that protection group again, right? See, it's still paused. It still has the policy we selected. It still has the two VMs we selected, right? So that's how easily I can perform a workflow in the UI, capture the API calls, bring them over to PowerShell, and execute that same kind of workflow in an automated fashion.